Well, thank to you, Anna, and to the organization. I'm very excited to be here. And by the way, I'm neither a Wittgensteinian nor a philosopher of physics. So my work is just trying to understand what Wittgenstein meant with what he said, similarity of relativity theory and his ideas. By the way, I should thank also Oskar Kusela, who invited me to speak about this matter at University of East Anglia. And my talk is just an attempt to answer questions raised there. First, I will give some short element of historical connection between relativity theory and Wittgenstein. Then I will speak about the analogy between relativity theory and Wittgenstein ideas. And I raise 3 problems about them. The analogy as it has been discussed since now. Then I speak of alien thought experiment, alien language games in Wittgenstein. And answering to the 3 problems, I try to give some clarification on how Wittgenstein treated alien thought experiments. Well, the beginning, the problem is whether Wittgenstein, whether Einstein actually did have any real impact on Wittgenstein philosophy, as Wittgenstein suggested. This is partly an historical question and partly a systematical. Did this impact had any systematical consequence, or was just something very general? Well, my beginning was, what would have read Jan Wittgenstein back home from the prison camp in August 1999 and beginning training for school teacher in Vienna? Well, German newspapers were in Vienna cafes, and German newspaper, just when Wittgenstein went back to Vienna, were speaking of the relativity theory. It was just a shock. I mean, he comes back from the war and go in the cafe, see this newspaper speaking about details of relativity theory. The Physische Zeitung say the value of the bending of the light beams is between 0.9 and 1.8 seconds of hour. The theory requires 1.7. Therefore, the theory is confirmed before the official confirmation. So this might have been a big impact on Wittgenstein's mind. Might have been. I'm not sure. Maybe he didn't go to any cafe. And the badly illustrated Zeitung begins this presentation. This is very rare for the time. A picture of a man, just idolatrization. So that Wittgenstein did not like that, probably. But he liked the theory, not the, as Rupert Reed said at the beginning. He did not like the attitude of, almost religious attitude towards this great genius. But he liked what he did. I mean, in December 1990, Wittgenstein met Russell to discuss the Tractatus. In 1920, Einstein lectures in Vienna. In 21, Russell writes to Wittgenstein about his lessons about relativity theory in China. Say, look, Ludwig, I have lectured about relativity theory to Chinese people. And Schlick sends Wittgenstein some works of his, and Schlick was one of the main interpreters of relativity theory. And certainly he sent Wittgenstein his work on space and time. And in 25, Russell publishes ABC of Relativity. And maybe Wittgenstein didn't read it, but I think a look, he might have given a look to it, to the book of Russell. And by the way, from 1927, there are discussions with Schlick and Vienna Circle. And a curiosity, Schlick writes to Einstein about the Tractatus. Who knows whether Einstein never read it? Schlick writes, look, this is a very important book, very deep, but Well, summarizing the historical data. There is a general interest in Einstein. Wittgenstein desires to study physics with Boltzmann. Then Boltzmann committed suicide in 1906. But general Wittgenstein intellectual environment, Schlick, Vienna Circle, Cambridge, Russell, all were connected with relativity theory. In particular, Vienna Circle, a discussion about verification is a criterion of meaning, unless we are told the reference body to which the statement of time refers. There is no meaning in a statement of a time of an event. Well, I mean, Vienna Circle studying Tractatus about meaningless proposition would be accepted this with enthusiasm, mixing logic of Frege, Russell, and Wittgenstein, and physics from Einstein, and inventing verificationism. And then there are remarks on the similarity between relativity theory and Wittgenstein ideas at any turn of his philosophy, and verificationism, philosophical grammar, rule following, and uncertainty. Well, I mean, the main turns of Wittgenstein development. I mean, as the previous speaker went on the internal development of Wittgenstein ideas, I go on a very superficial way on the main turns, maybe with some approximation. Well, what about this analogy? Well, let us read what Wittgenstein speaks about similarity. The first has been already quoted. It is differently verified, and so it is of a different kind. The verification is not a mere indication of the truth, but the time is the sense of the proposition. Einstein, how a magnitude is measured is what it is. And this comes in different part of the necklace in the big typescript and in philosophical grammar. Then there is a shift, not so explicit, but Wittgenstein speaks, the method of measuring time belongs to the grammar of time expression. And then when he speaks about verification and similar stuff, he says asking whether and how a proposition can be verified is only a particular way of asking, how do you mean? The answer is a contribution to the grammar of the proposition. And in this discussion, he makes some implicit reference to relativity theory that I think would be worth understanding. And the third, I say just Wittgenstein said first was a verificationist. Then he decided that everything is system, is a grammar, could be considered as a grammatical system. Then he developed the rule-following consideration after 38, or maybe also before, but especially after. Following according to the rule is fundamental to our language game. It characterizes what we call description. This is the similarity of my treatment with relativity theory. That is a consideration about the clocks with which we compare events. And last, actually this I make a trick. There is a long discussion in uncertainty, but there is something in the necklace which makes a summary of the discussion that will appear on uncertainty. I start work on a calculation and I am curious with what I will agree, and the calculation will show me. That is reminiscent of the theory of relativity. But what if we were wrong? Well, this uncertainty is present, there will be no calculating. Here, one more, there is needed a step like the one taken in relativity theory. These are very difficult to interpret. But there is a first interpretation of the analogy, and I just give this general presentation. The first interpretation is something like that. For rulers and clocks to be rigid is for them to be continuously updated and calibrated against each other. No coordination, no rigidity. If we were not coordinated and rigid in our responses to 2 + 2, then mathematics would be impossible. and without interaction with other rule followers, without agreeing with them, there would be no such thing as following a rule correctly. How could we summarize these ideas? Maybe these ideas presented in a paper by Kush, who unfortunately didn't come. We may give just a very general conclusion. As Einstein's work can be seen as a work on the tools with which we describe and compare events, so Wittgenstein's work can be seen as a work on the conceptual tools with which we describe the world. This is a general analogy. And these conceptual tools, our logic, must be coordinated and rigid. And this is an attempt to try to understand what an analogy between working on clocks and rules and working on concepts. But there are problems. Well, this picture does come from Einstein work on 1916, but from Einstein-Infeld, the divulgation of the relativity theory. A very nice book. What does Wittgenstein mean with system of reference? Well, he may mean also the framework on which the work in all language is based, the general framework. And he says, mathematicians do not dispute on whether a rule has been followed or not. This belongs to our general framework on which our language works. But he might also mean a different system, for instance, different belief systems, different religious systems. That's it. I found it very strange that one of a few cases, well, the only case I found, but probably there are others, in which Wittgenstein uses the term coordinate system and not a reference system, is when he speaks of a system of belief. That a very strange connection between relativity theory and morality or something like that. So we may restate the analogy and say, okay, Einstein's work can be seen, and Wittgenstein saw it as a work on the tools with which we describe and compare events. That is, a work on the behaviors on clocks and rods in different coordinate systems. I'm thinking mainly on spatial relativity. And Wittgenstein's work can be seen as a work on the conceptual tools with which we describe the world. That is, a work on the behavior of concepts in different conceptual frameworks. So we may go back to the original intuition of Vienna circle, when Einstein says, unless we are told the reference body to which the statement of time refers, there is no meaning in a statement of the time-wide event. We may translate it into Wittgensteinian jargon, like, unless we are told the language game to which a statement belongs, we cannot give any meaning to it. This is a very general analogy, but I think Wittgenstein is very clear on that. In order to give the meaning to an assertion, you need to understand the language game in which the assertion is developed. Now, my problem is, it is possible to push forward the similarity. Is it too much? Oh. Can you push this comparison a little further? If we follow the analogy between coordinate systems and language games, we may think of Wittgenstein's worries of alien language games. Well, so-called alien language games are ideal situations in which our ordinary concepts seem not working. In analogy to coordinate systems approaching the speed of light, where clocks and rules are deformed from our perspective, and the clocks slow down, rules shrink, and we have the paradox of the twins and so on. Then I pose 3 questions. Einstein's contribution was to find invariants to permit the right transformations, that can predict how clocks slow down and rulers shrink in a coordinate system that approximates the speed of light. Now, how does time dilation and length contraction fit in Wittgenstein framework, in Wittgenstein discussion of alien language game? And how to interpret the similarity between describing measuring tools, clocks and rulers, and describing concepts? And where to look in Wittgenstein for invariants that permit to understand and compare alien conceptual systems. Yes. Well, this is wood, but we'll come back on this later. Normally, as they say, there are two kinds of alien language games. Language games where different facts of nature. What if things disappear, they count in 2 and 2, sometimes get 5, sometimes 7, because things disappeared? What if a ruler had the property of shrinking in particular situation? What if people were without dreams? Just a biophysical difference of ours. And then language games where there are very different behaviors. And what if people did not have an expression of pain and behave in a very different way? And if somebody expressed pain, they laugh. What if people exchanged money with good with no relation with the values of good? What if a tribe sells wood by the area of the pile and not by the real quantity? This is an example of strange alien language games. Now, the debate on language games has been huge, enormous, I mean, in the Wittgensteinian community. And there are relativists and anti-relativists. And relativists are mainly relativist interpretation, I mean, relativist interpretation of Wittgenstein, not that people there are relativists. They say that Wittgenstein is relativist. They say that alien language games are a way to show the possibility of a concept and conceptual frameworks different from ours. And anti-relativist interpretations say, no, that's not true. Alien language games do not exemplify the real alternatives to our concepts, but are a way to clarify our concepts, showing the difference. These are the basic contrast. And my worry was, how is it possible such a divergence of interpretation? I mean, is Wittgenstein so unclear to permit such an alternative interpretation? Or maybe both interpretations are on their own track, and trying to interpret Wittgenstein through this debate is misleading. And maybe Wittgenstein's discussion of alien language games is not so strictly connected with these contemporary worries on relativism and anti-relativism, but can be better understood considering his attempts to find similarity with relativity theory. Well, let us see a short example of a language game. Wittgensteinians know it by heart. Maybe people who are not Wittgensteinians don't know it by heart. Well, let us suppose wood sellers sell wood by the length of the pile of wood.
You know, I think you might be better putting it on your... Because what's happening is every time you move, it's putting your leg.
Yes.
I think that might be better.
I was asking you if I may just make 5 minutes more because I'm just...
Oh, yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, let us suppose the wood, that better? Wood sellers sell wood by the length of the pile of wood. I say length because making the area is difficult from making a picture here. I am not very good at that. So the wood seller sells the wood in such a way that pile A, which is very long, is more valuable than pile B, which more wood, but it's shorter. Therefore, they sell A for more value than B. Well, Wittgenstein sometimes is really funny. Now, we wanted to teach this tribe our notion of quantity and take pile B and distribute the wood in a way that it is clear that it's longer than pile A, and then it is more wood. So we and the tribe, and we teach them how to behave. This is the original pile A, which is such long. Now we take the other pile, we distribute the wood so that the wood is longer now. Do you see, tribe-man, you ignorant, stupid tribe-man? We teach you what it means to have the right quantity. And then, under the idea of this nice attempt to instruct the alien in ignorant tribe, Wittgenstein suggests the following scenario. Perhaps they would say, now it is a lot of wood and costs more, and that would be the end of the matter. What's wrong in that? Now, let's try to answer this question with the answer of the question I had posed to the general similarity between relativity theory and Wittgenstein and coordinate system in language games. Does time dilation lag contraction fit in Wittgenstein's discussion of alien language game? In a coordinate system with high velocity, we see clocks slowing down and rods shrink, but inside their coordinate system, clocks and rods appear rigid and unchanged. Well, in the same way, in an analogous way, when we look at an indigenous tribe, we see a deformation of our concept. But the concept used there seems perfectly adequate from the point of view of the tribe. Well, if spatial relativity had a strong effect on Wittgenstein, then Wittgenstein constructive method, I use the term of John Preston because I liked it, of language games, takes a new input from the idea of alien language games. There, in alien language game, our normal concepts are deformed. They cannot be applied without any transformation. And this is a limitation of the anti-relativity interpretation. The deformation of our concepts show that they cannot be applied in any conceptual system as if they were absolute. And like Einstein showed that time is not an absolute measure, but depends on the coordinate system, Wittgenstein criticized the belief that certain concepts are absolutely the correct ones, and having different ones would mean not realizing something that we realize. Maybe having different concepts does not mean not realizing something that we realize, but doing something different. Therefore, I think it's wrong to claim that wood sellers do not realize something that we realize. They might just have different concepts, because their frame of reference is different from ours. We cannot apply our concept of selling or a lot of wood as such in their frame of reference. From relativity theory, before applying our concept, we should apply the right transformation to interpret them in their frame of reference, in their conceptual system, with their habit, their circumstances. Well, here Wittgenstein is following Frege and is following Einstein. In his example of the wood sellers, he was in a way reacting to some ideas of Frege and logical folly. And I mean, I quoted some other paper. The initial appearance of error when pressed reveals instead of a lack of understanding, instead a lack of understanding on our part. The problem with confronting, thinking about this community of wood sellers is not a problem in their practice, but rather a problem for us in interpreting just what it is they are doing. This is a paper by Cerbone published in the famous book, The New Wittgenstein, which reached similar conclusion working on the internal debate between Wittgenstein and Frege. And I think also working on this similarity, we may reach the similar conclusion. How to interpret the similarity between describing measuring tools, clocks and rulers, and describing concepts? In physics, we describe the behavior of our measuring tool, how clocks behave, how rulers behave in different coordinate systems. If not, our GPS couldn't work because the satellite had a different in time dilation. In philosophy, we describe the working of descriptive tools, concepts, and judgments in different language games. When Wittgenstein says that the rule following characterizes what we call description, he may mean two things. We don't know what he meant, right? We just hypothesize. He may think that rule following characterizes how concepts work in a conceptual system, or rule following characterizes our activity of describing these concepts. Some kind of meta description, but Wittgenstein would never use this horrible terminology. In the first case, well, rule following describe concepts that describe facts. Our normal concepts in an alien system cannot work as a description without care, because our concepts will be deformed in a way analogous to the way rulers shrink and clocks slow down in another reference system in special relativity. From the second point of view, concepts that describe our concepts, so rule following is what characterizes our description of our description of concepts. This kind of a description of descriptive tools requires the acknowledgement of different reference systems in order to make the correct transformations between the use of expressions in different reference systems. And here, I think we may find a limitation of relativist interpretations of Wittgenstein. Well, relativists were very happy when they discovered that Anscombe translated this passage with the common behavior of mankind is the system of reference by means of which we interpret an unknown language. But the common behavior of mankind was Anscombe interpretation. A more correct translation is the common human behavior. Then we may interpret this very famous passage of Wittgenstein referring to the common human behavior belonging to a tribe, a group, a culture, not the common human behavior of mankind. But in this case, assuming the strict relativistic interpretation, in the case of wood sellers, we have two different systems of reference, ours and the alien one. And we cannot apply our concept as such in the alien system. We need the right transformation to describe their concept and check what concept can be called the same as ours. But in order to do that, to define what it is the same time or the same concept, we need to rely on something invariant. And relativists don't want anything invariant. And where to look for invariants then, which permit to understand or compare alien frames of reference? Well, if our concepts do not work in an alien system, this does not necessarily mean that wood sellers do not understand the right concepts. But in order to make a comparison between our and their, we need to assume something. We have to assume that also tribesmen follow rules. I think this is something hidden in Wittgenstein, something very similar like Davison's rationality assumption or quantity principle. If somebody speaks a language, he follows rules. There's something we have to give for granted. And then, following the rationality assumption, if our concepts seem not to work properly, that it probably means that our translation manual is wrong. And Wittgenstein say, what they mean with a lot of wood is not what we mean. And it happened with Levi-Bruhl primitive logic. Levi-Bruhl claimed there is a primitive logic. They don't accept the law of non-contradiction. Primitives don't care. It's it's P, it's not P, don't care. Well, it was his translation. David Bloor was a wonderful anthropologist, but this idea was wrong, and Quine was very happy in showing that. To understand an alien culture, the transformation needed for our normal concept must help explaining the rule-following behavior of speaker of that culture. Therefore, the invariant is the ability to follow rule. It's like a light speed. It's something we cannot change. People follow rule. People who speak language follow rule. Conclusion. In relativity theory, we speak of simultaneity only given a frame of reference. And transformations are needed to compare the working of clocks in different reference systems, in different coordinate systems. In analyzing an alien language game, we need a way to identify what can be considered the same, and transformations are needed to understand what to consider as the same in different conceptual systems. And let me say, they don't mean the same, but a lot of wood, as we do. Just was saying, we have to change our translation if you want to go on in this. It's not the end of the matter when the tribesmen say, well, now it's more wood and now it's more valuable. It's not the end of the matter. It just means that we have to rethink everything. We have made something wrong in our transformation, the translation manual. Well, just this is a first attempt to try to understand what Wittgenstein could mean with the similarity between his idea and the relativity theory. They are not idea Wittgenstein expressed, just try to understand it. And just like I think putting Kant's discussion of the category of sensation and intellect on the background of Newtonian physics has been useful to better understanding Kant's philosophy. So maybe putting Wittgenstein's discussion of alien conceptual systems on the background of relativity theory may help to better understanding aspects of Wittgenstein philosophy. Okay.
Thank you very much. Before I answer the questions, I'm going to abuse my position as chair and ask the question myself, because I was planning to ask it. It seems pretty clear there is something wrong with the way these tribes people are measuring wood. And it seems to me you can get at that through this kind of analogy. Let's say we say, look, there's something wrong with our rules of taxation when Amazon and Google are paying so little tax. Right? That shows us that there's something wrong with these rules. Now you might imagine somebody in the tribe who's worked out that they can exploit their idiosyncratic way of regarding a lot of wood. By this way, they buy cheap, they buy a big pile of wood, they lay it out and they sell it dear, as it were. And the tribe noticed that this guy is getting much richer than anybody else. And the conclusion, surely they must draw, is that there's something wrong with their concept of a lot of wood.
Well, there's another alternative. They don't do. You begin to say there is something wrong in the way these people. What do they exactly say? Just I wanted to. There's something wrong in the way the people not calculate, the way the people measure, the people. Well, you would say they don't make a calculus there. They don't do what we call measuring.
But they buy and sell the wood, right?
Yes, they buy and sell the wood.
The price they pay for the wood is determined by in some sense, what they regard as a lot of wood.
What they regard what we call a lot of wood.
Okay.
Yes, but I mean, think of the potluck. I mean, people may just give things for free, and you don't know why. You have to study what's going on. And it's something we don't understand at the beginning. Well, people going to give something for free in the anthropological tradition of potluck. And then they say, why they give this for free? And so I mean, the idea is we should understand better what's going on there, which is not some kind of a calculus of how much wood and how less wood. Maybe there is a surrounding situation in which, well, okay, you lay down wood and then doing this you take more money. And what's wrong with that? But it's not what we call selling, for instance.
But it's an incoherent system. I mean, why would they want the wood? Maybe they want the wood for making fires, right?
We don't know. I mean, it appears incoherent to us. But look, if they are happy with that, now we have more money.
But my view is they shouldn't be happy.
They should. Well, maybe somebody is happy to have less money. Then they put the wood on the short pile and say, now I have less money because I don't need them. I mean, it's the paper published in the New Wittgenstein was just saying, in order to understand the meaning of what they say, we need to understand all the surrounding relations. And if we don't have this, we cannot really understand what's going on there. It's not a measuring of selling.
Maybe we can't understand it because it's incoherent.
Maybe not.
Anyway, sorry. All those hands went up at once. I'm going to... Yeah, okay.
I want to say something to this particular problem because the discussion has been very abstract. But in the late 19th century, Australian Aboriginal people were regarded as being primitive because they did not have an economy. That was the way that they were seen. They weren't thought to exchange things with money, etc. And they were described as primitive for those reasons. And Malinowski argued that they don't have a monetary economy, but in their ritual behaviour, we can see a form of symbolic economy. And that was one of the things that he did to argue that we should not describe Australian Aboriginal people as primitive. So there's a concrete anthropological development that may in fact have been part of Wittgenstein's understanding. I don't know if there's any translation from that to the abstract games that have been described here. Could you speculate on that possibly?
Well, thank you a lot. This is a good example. Yes.
Do you want to say more about it?
No. It's wonderful. I mean, I take it when Malinowski taught us something about that.
All right, over there.
Just very quickly, and we had a visiting fellow from Australia who works on Aboriginal culture, law, customs, and rock art. And it's a pity he couldn't be here today because of illness. But in actual fact, he's shown from his research and working with the people in Australia, I'm an Australian incidentally, that there was a much stronger system of custom and law, but with the invasion or the settlement and the bringing of the Western culture, things changed very much, and there's been a loss. And now the work of here in Oxford has been to have Indigenous come and to try and bring some reconciliation between these great differences. I think that's a very good example that's been given.
So saying the network or rules and habits was stronger and were well connected before.
Yes, and the Wittgenstein being taught on language was a tremendous amount of insight for us at this point, not only in how we talk to each other culturally, but even across the disciplines like physics and philosophy.
Well, the difficult thing that Wittgenstein never makes actual examples, just fictional examples, and that these are more difficult to understand than a real example like in Malinowski's case. It is as if, well, he said, well, I don't care to find example, I may just invent them. But inventing them make it really difficult to get the point. But probably the anthropologist got the point later very well on this aspect.
James.
Yeah, related to those comments, I was just reflecting that the alien tribe could indeed be our very own tribe, that are 1,000 years in the past or 1,000 years in the future. And one of the most common sort of mistakes, as it were, in modern commentaries is to assume our set of rules being applied to the processes of 1,000 years ago, or indeed in the extrapolation of our current thinking and processes to 1,000 years in the future.
Yeah.
Fascinating as it is to participate in a reenactment of a conversation between a district commissioner and an anthropologist, I wondered if it would be also useful to see what this analysis, which I'm very grateful for, says about Wittgenstein and physics, since we were told by Rupert Reed at the start of today that one of the things that Wittgenstein might be said to be most hostile to is the thought that there is a set of universal natural laws and that to articulate them is to explain. And what you've shown us is that minimally a way of making sense of some kind of relativist version of the Wittgensteinian approach is that one has to have a sociological universal. And that sociological universal, you called it the principle of charity, is that all groups follow rules. Is that a law or not?
Well, it's not a scientific law, but maybe Chomsky might think that in our brain we have quantifier. I mean, somebody take this as a strict law, strict universal law. There are universalists in this sense. Well, Wittgenstein, I don't know, he didn't want to be a scientist. He wanted to be a philosopher. It was just to dismantle wrong ideas. So he didn't want to build a scientific view of sociology. But I think his idea of rule forming is something which arrived later as a solution, because, you know, Wittgenstein is anti-foundationalist, but he says rule forming is fundamental for our language game. So it's like it's coming back to the idea of something which is shown and it cannot be said, as in the Tractatus. We may see people following a rule, and we cannot just then describe a principle of a rule following which is universal for everybody. We have to understand case by case what it means to follow rules. That might be a possible answer.
Surely the statement, following a rule is fundamental to language games, could be understood not as a universal law, but as a grammatical proposition. It's just, that's what we call using language.
Exactly. That's, you say that. Thank you.
Bill, I have a feeling that yours was one of the hands that went up. Is that right?
I was quite interested when you were talking about the Aboriginals and having money and them having no concept of it. I would have thought that the Aboriginal value system would actually say money means nothing to me at that moment in time. But if you gave me land and water, then that was the language you would have to try and explain to that person at that moment in time. If from a tribal perspective, the main value system was I have no idea what money is. So I'm coming with a whole lot of cash, but I don't understand what money means because my value system is thinking completely different from yours.
As I said, maybe a connection with money is different from an economical system of as we know it. And then, I mean, to study how it works, it is not easy. I mean, they say, well, they behave differently, it's fine. No, it's a very complicated matter to understand, as you say, the networks of relations of different values and habits and other things. That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, just a couple of comments, really. Just firstly, on the very interesting point about, we're talking about tribes from thousands of years ago, rather than elsewhere in the world, so temporally distant rather than spatially distant. Just to remark that my reading of Kuhn is that that's exactly what he's interested in, with regard to our scientific practices. And that's what makes it so fascinating for people like us. So his great example is Aristotle, who says, for years I tried to understand Aristotle's physics, and I thought, how can Aristotle be so stupid, and he make these elementary mistakes, and so on. And then I realised, hold on, there's a whole kind of different way of seeing this, such that it actually starts to kind of work as a different system of thought. So I think that's exactly what Kuhn was doing, whereas someone like Winch does it with regard to distant tribes living now. And then on the other question, if I may, on the explaining, just to be clear about what I was saying about the taxators, Wittgenstein isn't saying that there's anything wrong with explaining. I think that's a lot of what people do in science. That his concern was about the illusion that everything can be explained, or that the explainer somehow explains itself as well, or of explaining as if somehow the laws which are allegedly explained by means of had a kind of power to them. So Nietzsche has a lovely remark about this. He says, what are we doing when we talk about laws of nature? We're supposed to imagine that God punishes the atoms if they don't obey the laws. So in some sort of way to that, I think Wittgenstein is drawing attention to the downsides of the metaphor of law, which we import into our understanding of what natural science is. And yeah, and lastly, on the universal point, I think I agree roughly with what Ray just said. If we're talking about sociological universals or linguistic universals, we have to be very careful not to think that what we're talking about is something like an object with the same kind of character of things that people find in genuinely scientific enterprises. It's not so much an object, it's more a way of seeing, which I think is very close to how we should properly understand what a so-called grammatical proposition is. So that's helpful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. This was happy.
Yeah. I understand the difficulty in the kind of description that we should give to practices in a different culture, such as the transaction of wood in the case you gave. Doesn't the same problem arise within the same culture when you go far enough back into the past? I dislike period dramas and films, often because I feel unfamiliar with many of the ethical and other concepts that are being portrayed and played out. But I feel a sense of question as to whether, in fact, what's being portrayed to me is anything like what those concepts meant then in that culture, that time, even though it's mine and it's 200 years ago.
That's
so certain ethical, particularly ethical concepts that I've carried through and we're familiar with, kindness, generosity, honour, duty, and all those kind of things. You really wonder whether the concept of honour, for example, that might exist in a discussion of an ethical dilemma today, can mean anything like what it meant in the Victorian times or before then. So doesn't this relativity problem and the appropriateness of the description loom even just as large when you have something that changes over time, even though it may be a continuous culture?
Well, that's apparently true. Aliens are among us. The problem is not that in the past we don't understand the past and the past is relative. We have to find the way in which the right transformation to understand what was going on there. And what I thought, I mean, Wittgenstein is strange. He's strange about science because he knows science. He has studied more or less the same kind of studies Einstein did. I mean, the study in engineering at the time was very complex and interested better than now. He knew science very well. He knew how it is complicated to find in mathematical equations our way, to distinguish different kinds of number, how to treat infinite he was just very happy to play with the diagonal invention with oh my God, no, Cantor, with his friend and pupil, with Kreisel. Kreisel says, well, Wittgenstein was just enjoying inventing diagonal. He liked that. And then he criticized the mythology Cantor, according to him, put on it. But he liked the Cantor technique. And so I think he realized how it is difficult, as in science, also in human interaction, to understand, to make the right translation of what is a system different from ours, be it in the past, or be it in an alien culture, or be it in a culture among ours, which now we have too many cultures together, and it's difficult to understand what some young people do, what some terrorists do, and other things. Difficult to understand. But it's really difficult. As in science, it is difficult to find the right transformation to understand which time dilation is necessary to coordinate our instrument on the Earth with the satellites, for instance. So anthropologists have to be careful and to work more attentively on these differences. It's always like the wonderful quotation he makes, I will teach you the differences. Wittgenstein was interested in differences, in understanding differences. And this is one case, from the past to the present, from one culture to another.
Okay, good. Well, I think, okay, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I have a question on the analogy between special relativity and the later Wittgenstein. So, which I found interesting, but I was wondering how far you can push it. And in the case of Einstein and special relativity in particular, he was driven by the observation of a lack of asymmetry in the phenomena of electromagnetic induction. That's what suggested to him the special relativity theory. So the claim there, as a logical positivist, or at least was taken to be so by many members of logical positivism, is that the theory should not contain asymmetries that are not contained in the phenomena. Now, of course, Einstein gave up this sort of positivism later on in his life, and I don't think that Wittgenstein could be said or described to be a positivist of that sort, but I wonder if there is any analogy at that level too. So is there any sense in which the Wittgensteinian relativity of language games or conceptual schemas can be traced back to the observation of a particular sort of symmetric phenomenon, such as electromagnetic induction? Is there an analogy there as well? That would be...
Well, I tried to push the analogy as much as I could, but well, my sensation is that Wittgenstein uses Einstein to give his ideas, and it is not properly. This I was discussing this with Diego Marconi, a friend of mine. Actually, Wittgenstein tries to take inside his system, even if he has no system, inside his way of thinking other people's ideas. So the analogy I presented was just something a bit too strict in respect of what Wittgenstein used to say in his papers. So I think I would not push the analogy even more in that direction. But who knows? It might be helpful, and then I have to think it over. Thank you. That's an interesting point.
Yeah, thanks. I wonder if there's more to say than just pushing the analogy. The conference about philosophy, about physics. One thing that's noticed very clearly from your discussion is that we are in the position of the woodcutters as regard physicists.
We are in the position of?
We are in regard to the woodcutters as regard physicists. Because they tell us, as it were, appear to, we feel frightened by the prospect of, they're saying that our ordinary practice, our ordinary concepts involving mass and length and time and so forth, the way we use these concepts are somehow merely approximations, or sort of defective in some way, or indeed incoherent. So the real worry here it's not just an analogy, but there's something physics appears to tell us that our ordinary practice is incoherent. And of course, Wittgenstein would want, I guess, to defend that ordinary practice. And the question is how we manage that relationship now. How do we get Wittgenstein's view in balance with wanting to be in favour of science and anti-scientism, and yet recognise that, at least some of the time it's telling us, that our ordinary practices in some way defective.
Are you suggesting that physicists are like we with the tribe, and we normal people, not physicists, are like the tribe? Well, actually, I preparing this stuff, I was discussing a lot with my father-in-law who teaches physics at the University of Bologna. And I felt this situation. He looked at me like an ignorant tribe man who make lots of difficulty to understand difficult stuff. And probably we say, okay, no, you are free to use your language in an approximate way until you don't pretend to do a scientific work. Don't use mass, energy in a layman way, pretending to make scientific work. If you have to change system and to study physics.
We don't regard our ordinary practices as an approximation.
Graham, I think, wants to get in on this point, and then we have another point.
Just a very brief follow-up to that last quote, very good. Going back to the quote that we were given from Hertz earlier on, which was fascinating. I mean, you look at modern theoretical physicists are now looking at the apparent irreconcilability of quantum field theory and gravity to say that many of them are basically longing, a word I've heard used in their presence, to see the end of space and time. It's that contradiction that will lead to the end of something that, as far as I can see, many parts of this discussion take for granted.
Well, I have no answer on that. That's too difficult.
Yes, it's fascinating listening to all this because a lot of these questions seem to come back to generally problem of conceptual schemes. We each employ different conceptual schemes, different cultures, but also, our understanding of space and time are also based on different conceptual schemes. Is it, just want to clarify, was it your, did you regard it that tribes, for example, have grammatical, that the way they see things is based on is a grammatical proposition? Is that
the way you
see the woodcutters?
No, what I said was a grammatical proposition was the idea that rule following is fundamental to using the language. That seems to be a grammatical proposition. My problem with the woodcutters is that the flaws in their way of attaching a price to a quantity of wood can be quite easily exposed. Okay, well, thank you to Carlo for a really fascinating discussion. Thank you very much.